everyone. I would like to welcome you to our panel discussion on changing the pattern of public discourse, featuring a distinguished lineup of authors as part of Ananke Women in Literature Festival 2024, themed around language and erasure. We are thrilled to have with us authors who bring their unique perspectives and experiences to the table, enriching our dialogue with their literary insights. Together today in this panel, we will embark on a journey of exploration, navigating the intricate landscape of public discourse through the lens of language and erasure. Our esteemed panelists will draw from their own experiences as authors to shed light on the power of language, the nuances of tone, and the art of framing narratives in shaping public perceptions. Today, we have with us Dr. Tanushree Ghosh. Dr. Tanushree Ghosh is director at Intel Corp, a social activist and an author. Her blog posts, op-eds, poems, and stories are her efforts to provoke thoughts, especially towards issues concerning social justice. She is a contributor, past and present, to several popular e-zines, including the Huffington Post US, where her first post on returning to India as the mother of a daughter went viral and was picked up by Yahoo News, and where she subsequently authored many successful op-eds on gender, Syria war, mental health, the Western media's coverage of the Brazil Olympic, and so on. Her literary resume includes poems and stories featured in national and international magazines, as well as inclusion in over a dozen anthologies, such as Defiant Dreams, which was on the Opera 2016 reading list and the Best Asian Short Stories 2017, published by Kitab from Singapore. She was a winner of the Orange Flower Award for a short story in the LGBTQ category and was the winner of Intel's Global Diversity and Inclusion Advocate of the Year for Greater America in 2022. Her works have also been nominated for several other social category awards in India. Tanushree is a mother to an 11-year-old and lives in Chandler. We have Muniba Mahmood, a self-described compulsive writer. Muniba works with poetry and prose, long form and short stories. Her work frequently speaks to social injustice, spirituality, and to the diasporic experience. She has performed her story at events in the UK, and her work has been featured by the Lotet Tree Press. Muniba is the founder and lead of Ravani, an initiative to support creative thought and expression. She oversees its major initiatives, including the production of its podcast, publications, and events. Muniba day jobs in marketing and has studied business, politics, and development and novel writing, whilst remaining interested in a variety of other subjects. She suspects that these influences reflect in her writing. Originally from Pakistan, she currently resides in the UK. We also have with us Nilanjana Bhaumik. Nilanjana is a Delhi-based journalist and feminist writer with a master's in international journalism from Birmingham City University, UK. She has a distinguished two-decade career spanning roles with the BBC World Service, Time Magazine, Agency, EFE, EPA. Her work has been featured in major publications like the National Geographic, The Guardian, The New Internationalist, and The Washington Post. Presently, she contributes her expertise to UN Women India as a writer and editor, leading the content production efforts for the country office. Bhaumik's reporting on gender and development has earned her numerous international accolades. She is the author of 2 books that delve into the intricate lives of modern Indian women, navigating the complex interplay between modernity and tradition through their personal experiences. And we have Dr. Salma Siddiqui. Salma has been one of the Ravani's founding members and contributors. She writes poetry in English and Urdu and is an avid reader of literature in multiple languages. She is a clinical psychologist by profession and the former dean, School of Social Sciences and Humanities, and founding head of the Department of Behavioral Sciences at NUST Islamabad. The session will be moderated by Sridevi Nayak. Sridevi Nayak is a Bangalore-based communication professional, having first-hand experience in the fields of public relations, content writing, including ghostwriting, corporate communications, and social media marketing. An alumna of Manipal University, she holds a postgraduate degree in communication management and a bachelor's degree in journalism and communications. At leisure, Sridevi reads and listens to books across genres. Her favorites include personal memoirs, narrative, creative nonfiction, and essays. In addition, she prefers to maintain a journal, recording her observations on various topics, such as personal experience with memory forming a central theme. In the future, Sridevi aspires to become an author. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Over to you, Sridevi.
Thank you, Namrata. First, I would like to thank Ananke and Kimia team for this opportunity, and also thank you to all the panelists over here for having me. Um, let's dive into the questions if you are okay, if you all are okay. Um, how was your experience as an author influenced your understanding of the importance of language and communication in shaping public discourse? Yeah, sure, Muniba. Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for having us over here today. So I would say that, the first thing to understand when you think about the role of an author or any piece of writing or any kind of narrative in shaping public discourse is to think about how your choice of language can shape perception, right? So you could be conveying the same message in different words and, achieve a very different result. A very common example that's cited for this is that, when you're quoting the math results of school children, you could say something like, girls are as good as boys at math, right? You're conveying a certain message when you say that. But equally, you could say it that boys and girls are equally good at math, and that conveys a very different message with the same fact. I'll comment a little bit on my experience prior to starting writing more regularly a few years ago as well. So as mentioned in the introduction, I work in marketing. I've done that for a number of years. I have also studied public policy, public administration and global affairs. And in doing that, in both these very different spheres, what I found, these things actually have shaped my understanding of the importance of public discourse, for example. So as a marketer, in order for people to buy a product or service that I'm trying to sell, I need to create a narrative around that, right? So I need to create a public perception through my words and communication that, something is good or something is bad. What is the impact of buying something or not buying something? Similarly, and I was quite surprised when I learned this, but and maybe this is common knowledge for many, but politicians have an entire PR team working for them. They have an entire communications team that manages crisis, right? So it's not just a policy element of it, it's a communication and public perception of, the message that they're sending that becomes really important. And when you understand how these two fields that are so critical to the functioning of the modern world operate, you'll understand the importance of writing and literature in this space as well, right? So creativity is, of course, a more authentic form of human expression. But, when you have publications preferring a certain kind of narrative, preferring a certain writing style, othering some, minority writers or, representing them, whatever the choice may be made over there, that choice has an impact on, public perception of people. How certain nationalities are represented, how certain ethnic groups are represented in common literature, in, even in movies, for example, that starts to shape people's understanding of who they are.
Would you like to add something, Ms. Salma?
Yeah, sure. So Muniba has really pointed out very rightly, the language is a powerful tool, you can say. We can use it to really, it guides the discourse in a certain direction, adds meaning and value, or it takes away all the values. So the otherization that Muniba talks about, it's also very important. And especially the kind of perception that we are creating by choice of words. And in many a time, I'm also seeing that there are many words that are not in use anymore. And there are many words that are used now, many in vogue, that have a meaning that I, at least as an author and a teacher, don't relate to. So when in my line of work, because being a psychologist, I have to understand and use empathy to understand the other world, the other person's world. and his reality, his lived reality. So if I am not equipped with the right language, I don't think I can even claim that I understand the other person. So this is how the language is important. But you know what I'm seeing around myself, that language is weaponized. And you see that in what way the new meanings are being given, or meanings are subtracted from a word or a term that we were very used to in our childhood. So one must be very careful in really understanding, is this discourse being led by the choice of words? Are we really representing the experiences of the people that we are representing as an author? Or is it like my perspective, my perception, or whatever position I hold in that area that is like influencing and taking away the power of the very people I claim to represent? So this is something that is very important in how the language is being used as a tool, and weaponized. And now we see a lot of polarization in our public sphere. So the middle ground, I think, it's shrinking. So there are lots of black and white, and the grays. It's so hard to have that middle ground when we are conversing and talking about anything, and really having that position that this is my perception, this is how I see it, and you may see and speak about this experience in a different manner. So this middle ground where I am okay with how I view it, and it is entirely possible that the other person has an entirely different perspective on the same thing. This is something I think gradually losing from the public discourse, and that is creating the polarization, whether you see it politics or in social debates. And so I think social media has really contributed to this polarization and the language becoming weaponized.
Would you like to add something, Tanu?
Yeah, so I think that Muniba and Salma spoke a lot about the language. I think very valid points. And we all know that the polarization is happening, and that is because of course, the middle space disappearing. And also the second reason for that, which is also well known, is facts losing its value and really opinions replacing facts, right? Because any fact can be now challenged with the opinion, and the opinion turns into a fact. So with that, I feel that public discourse is even more important than ever. And we as authors, I feel that really are in a position of power or influence, not because of how many people will be able to reach, because it all depends on the readership, but really from what you can create. And what I want to talk about there is the audience. I have realized more and more importantly that who is the audience and what matters to them on the same topic is very important. I will give you two examples. One is the abortion rights debate right now that is going on in the US. The problem is that there is a lot of dialogue that's being formed around that's around women's health. But when we go talk to most people from my activism front, whether men or women, they don't care that much about women's health. The reason is they believe that can't happen to them, or they believe that if it really happens to them, it really can't be, that their life would be at risk. That's just not possible. So how do you speak to them? Some of the things that affect to some people is civil liberties, crimes increasing, what happens to unwanted children, influence on consensual sex as adults. But those kind of things are not being built into the forefront in a language that people understand. And the other example of this is amazing. I recently watched the trial of Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. You have all heard about this, the divorce trial. And that is a prime example of how public perception is formed by using certain narratives, and how the same truth can be presented in very different ways based on who is telling the story and what words are they using. And it was amazing to me because before I watched the show, many of my friends said, oh, it was blindsidedly Johnny Depp, and Amber Heard is crazy. She's insane. This woman doesn't really have her faculties figured out. When I watched the Netflix documentary, I realized that was not the case at all. There was anger on both sides, and there were very, very clear evidence of what Amber Heard was saying. And then There were many things that came out after that on how evidence was hidden. Why I bring up this court case in this public discourse discussion is because, however, then when you look into what happened, you see it's all peer forming a public perception to strive the narrative towards an outcome. And that's why when I wrote my book Beyond #MeToo, which is with Sage Publication, I really didn't think we need to write a book on Me Too or women's rights. But the problem that was happening is Me Too was being talked about either in terms of the language of very, op-ed kind of urban women, or women's rights have been historically talked about when we try to talk about the more nuanced aspect of it in a very academic tone. And if we maintain the same tone, then we're preaching to the choir. If I try to go talk about 498 and dowry and other things, how we are not really destroying Indian families where the nuance is, but I talk it in terms of research papers and stuff, most women I talk to, they don't want to listen to it. They don't think that will affect their life until it does. So that's why the thing we tried there was how to write something with academic integrity in a very trade language. And those are just some of the learnings, but to wrap this up, my key point is what you say is really going to be relevant if you have figured out how to say it based on who you are saying it to. And that is really what you need to find out. And, I don't want to take time away because I see Nilanjana has joined, but next time when I will speak, I will give another example of language on another very controversial topic, which can probably help this point a little bit more. Thank you.
Since Nilanjana has joined now, hi Nilanjana, welcome to the panel. I was asking the questions to the other panelists that how has your experience as an author influenced your understanding the importance of language and communication in shaping public discourse?
I mean, narrative, I think is very important. So, when we talk about public discourse, I immediately think narrative. And as a journalist and as an author, I think narrative is very important. And, I work with, I write on gender. So, narrative is, is supremely important, how we present women, right? How we have been presenting women through the ages. And of course, there's a lot of, stereotyping. There's a lot of discrimination in the way women are presented in the public discourse. And I think, it is the foremost challenge, like confronting all of us is to challenge this narrative. Like, my, in my first book, Lies Our Mothers Told Us, I talked about this a lot, but then, again, the question that often comes back to me is that when we talk about narrative, how do we break down this narrative? It's the hardest thing to do because, it's like embedded in us. It's inherent. We grow up with it. And it's just not men, women also, like grow up with this narrative, this socialization of women's role in society. So I think, as a role, I have always been very disturbed by this narrative about how, no matter how far a woman goes, the way, she is being perceived. And, like some of this public cases are a case in point, how a woman is painted in, like media or, social media or, like in public discourse. So I feel, like that is a huge, huge challenge. And I feel that, breaking down social norms is a huge challenge, when it comes to women's empowerment. So as an author, I have always felt that, and which is why, I have tried to, like break this down into life experiences. So, in my books, I talk through other women's, including mine, mine and other women's life experiences. I talk about this, because I feel like women need to identify them, this as a barrier, because often, we are too willing to accept them. We are like, okay, like this is fine, this is just how, like women are supposed to be. But that's not true. That's a narrative that has been created about women and women's role in society. So yeah, that is something that really consumes me.
So now that we know the challenges, do you think that all these complex issues, such as um, how the narratives that is there in politics or social justice, do you think that if we start to foster a culture of active listening and awareness on not selective empathy but a universal kind of empathy among the key stakeholders, sorry for using the marketing language, but yes, these are all key stakeholders here, um, would promote deeper understanding and collaborating, like, okay, come, let's because like one said, there's no middle ground over here. Do you think that active listening and fostering active listening and encouraging empathy and practicing empathy from wherever we are could be the middle ground for deeper understanding and collaboration in this public discourse?
I think,
Anyone?
sorry, if I can just, but take that, because, it's like kind of a continuation of what I was saying. uh I feel like, we are kind of beyond empathy now, or maybe, we are not in the empathy stage as yet. You can look at it, both ways. I feel like what is most important for me, and I am not just an author or a journalist, but I'm a very keen observer of life. I feel like community building, it's what is most important. So much distrust, and this is also part of this narrative that you are talking about. um why do we need, like hashtags like women empowering women? Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't it like, we don't have hashtags like men empowering men or men for men? You know what I mean? So what I mean is that this distrust, there is a trust deficit between women, and which has been created specifically by patriarchy, uh, because of, like, it's just easier to divide and rule, right? So I'm saying that, women need to come together and, really come together in solidarity groups and, build community, share their, like, lived experiences. And this has to start with women. And, I believe that, women are doing a lot to empower themselves. And while, it is not our responsibility to educate the men or to empower the men, but it is definitely our responsibility to come together to form solidarity groups, pressure groups, so that, we can really, build those allyships, that will matter, in this going forward.
Ms. Salma, would you like to add something?
Yeah,
After
so
Ms. Salma, Muniba, you can take over.
okay. So one thing, like if we talk about empathy, I think that sometimes we use this word again more frequently without really understanding the meaning of the word, and it has become a cliched word. So what I think is the very basic thing is that's important is that concerning and realizing our own identity. Who are we? Simply, we are humans. That's all. Isn't it enough? Can we be human? What are the values that help us stay human and connect with another human? If that is empathy, okay, it's fine. Have empathy. But the thing is that we have forgotten this very basic thing that we are all human and live in a planet which is the only planet perhaps for us. So we're not only destroying the very planet that is habitable, we are destroying the relationship because we want to develop and progress. So we are really, I don't know, in a race. So I think we need to take a pause. And when we realize that we are human and we can really survive with very little, we can survive with very little. And perhaps we have to really realize that, because just before we started this, we were talking about the scarcity of water. So you make all this progress, and you try to reach Mars, to make it habitable, and you make this world more inhabitable. So these are the realities. I think we are really confused, and we have confused many things. We have to really realize and recognize that we are human, and the human values that help us connect with each other, understand the pain that the other person is going through without confusing it with the identities and the labels that we use to categorize and otherize the person. So unless and until we simplify the discourse, these war of narratives, these are actually I think the new kind of war, which is the hybrid war, where narratives, it's the war of narratives. Each country, each group, each community is using it against the others. So we have to really simplify this and recognize that we are all human, and we can only survive if we just remember to survive. We have to acknowledge this very basic fact that we need to really prioritize our humanity.
Okay. Muniba, would you like to add on Ms. Salma's point?
Thank you, everyone. I think you've made some really powerful points over there. And what I'm going to say, is going to try and build upon, everything that has been discussed over the past few minutes. So Tanushree raised a very important point about audience. And when we talk about raising empathy again, right? So when we talk about creating an empathy through the narratives and through our written work, I think it's important to understand who we're communicating with and to speak to them in appropriate language. And to Salma's point that, we're humans and we should not be engaging in a narrative war, I completely agree with that. But building on that, there should be space, and authors need to be creating it, as well as, collectives and, small press, independent press, and, so on. So everybody in this space should be actively working to give space to more narratives, right? So when freedom of speech becomes risky, when freedom of speech, goes amiss, is when there are no boundaries on that, number one, right? So when hate speech and so on, when outrage culture can exist without any checks and balances on it. But equally, when it's only one-sided, when there's a one-sided conversation that's not allowing for rebuttal of opinions that are being presented as facts, and when you're not allowing for debate and discourse to take place, that's when you're going to have a lot of misunderstandings created between groups. So I would say that the key to empathy is to allow more representation and more stories to be told. And this naturally, when we talk about that, the inclusion that we need to be working towards is naturally towards whoever is a minority in a particular community, right? And the minority would look different wherever in the world you are. Women, I suppose, are always, relatively subjugated, despite the advances that the world has made in the last, few years on this. But equally, there are minority ethnic groups, there are minority religions wherever you're living, and their narratives are usually silenced or not shared as much, right? So when you create a space for everyone to start telling their stories, stories are more than just facts, stories are emotive. And when you can convey a human's emotions, they don't remain the other, they don't remain, a label. They become a human that other people can relate to, that other people can start seeing as, somebody who's worthy of, a life, who's as worthy of life and, human rights as another. And so I would say that to create that empathy, it's very important for there to be a space for multiple stories to be shared.
Sure. Would you like to add anything, Ms. Dr. Tanushree, please?
Yes, I get a little thrown off when someone says Dr. Tanushree Ghosh, because I haven't used doctor for so long. I wonder if you're talking to me or not, but thank you for using that. That comes from my PhD. It's not a medical doctor. But anyways, see, at least in my mind, there is no question that active listening and empathy can help this, right? Of course, if we can develop even a little bit of empathy to pause and think about, okay, where the other narrative might be coming from. And then the other combination of this active narrative, active listening and empathy is ego. I think what gets into way many times is strong identification who we are, all these nationalist ideas, all these individualistic ideas of this. Even sometimes I feel that maybe we have done ourselves some disservice by strongly identifying in certain kind of gender identities that has creates polarization even more. I'm not saying ignore the problem. So ego is the third part of it, where you, even if you can try to get empathetic, you feel your what you identify very strongly with is getting challenged or is at risk somehow. And that triggers, and therefore everything is now, out the door. Now, that being said, however, I feel the real question is how to get there, how to get to this active listening and empathy in more and more spaces. And I think Muniba made a very good point of this starting small independent presses, this kind of discourses, and then slowly, hopefully, that will get into a bigger conglomerate. But my point on this is, alongside with starting small and then also keeping on the effort, I think we are humans, and humans are also deeply flawed. So I think that, and those are all individual, but I think one of the things is not to strive for perfection, maybe. So I will give another short example. I was not very happy with what is going on in India in terms of certain nationalist agendas being combined with religious narratives. And I wrote a Facebook post in which I said, I thought about how to speak about this. I knew that, how my Facebook friends group is now, including a lot of my own family. If I said something very direct, I would be buried in the outrage and I will not be able to deal with it. So let alone get the message through. So after thinking a lot, I wrote a small post which came from the heart, which I said, maybe I understand God wrong, but my Ram would have been happier if Ram Rajya came before Ram Mandir. And, that post resonated with a lot of people. A lot of people wrote me letters and stuff, but there were also a few people who said, what do you mean by my Ram? Ram is not yours. And I thought, oh, the word mine, that is what triggered them in this situation. Like, would it have been better if we used our? But my point here is, no matter how much we try with language and sensitivity, getting 100% active listening is not going to be possible. If we aim for that, then we will not start at all. So start somewhere and then take from there. If you can do an honest job of keeping your ego to the side and be empathetic to the other person and keep on talking about it. Actually, I will give another example. When Donald Trump won in this US presidential election first time, I was with a colleague in Intel Cafe, and this person was very sad. I said, why are you sad? He said, well, Trump won. I said, okay, yes, okay, obviously, I can understand that maybe not wanting to go into politics, into work. And then he said, I'm sad because I voted for him. And I said, okay, where is this going? And he says, I voted for him because, Obama was going to make these bathrooms where all the boys were going to come into the girls' bathroom, and I have 3 daughters. And I thought, what is he talking about? And then I realized that there is a lot of narrative out there regarding transgender bathroom, which was placed in a way which created panic in minds of parents. So the choice I had to make there was, do I talk to him or do I not talk to him? Because my feelings on these issues were so strong that I felt that, where do I even start with this person? But then I thought, if I don't talk to him, then I'm always talking to the people who think like me. Then how will I ever get to a space of getting even one person more to think maybe differently, not maybe like me, but at least in the neutral space that Salma was talking about, the middle space. So I tried to talk to him, and I will not go into that because I don't want to make this too long of an example. But there was also additional learning there that just like you cannot get 100%, if you really listen to other person's fear, no matter how ridiculous that seems to you from your vantage point, maybe you can get 30-40% people to listen better.
And if I may add to what just Tanu said, is that because in my line of work, I do counsel people. People come with their own ideas of distress or whatever is happening to their life. And what I have learned, what's most helpful is what just Tanu pointed out, is that how do you understand the other person's perspective? And which you all earlier mentioned, Tanu, is that the difference between opinion and fact. Many a time we start believing our own opinion as facts, and never have time or the pause to check. And I think in public discourses, this is something that is very important. And if we can introduce that, and naturally for that, active listening, empathy, all that is very much needed, is that I'm entitled to have my own opinion, but that does not make it a fact. And each one can have their own opinions, and we are entitled to have them, but we have to remember that they are our opinion and they do not become facts. So this is where this difference disappear, that all the problems start emerging. So that is something that I think we need to be mindful of. And I think children used to be taught that in a school some time back. And I don't know, I think now the adults need to be taught this.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Hey, Devi, you are on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I think the setting went off. So I was saying, since you, as an author, what do you think, what is the role of a literature play while initiating a conversation or a sensitive topic, and how can an author leverage their story skill, especially while addressing these issues? And I'm going to club this with one more question because it's very relatable. How do you handle criticism? Because when addressing such topics, you are also, I mean, in a way, because of people's lack of intelligence or whatever you call it, in a way you are going to face a dismissing culture or a cancel culture, cancel culture, and it can be too overwhelming at times, and some people have that agency to be like, okay, fine, I can handle it. But in a general way, how will you ensure that your story skill is not is going to initiate conversation on this complex topic? How are you going to use your storytelling skills? Second, how are you going to handle criticism while there are two different perspectives in writing? Anyone?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess
Tanu,
I will start because I learned this the very hard way. Okay, so I always wanted to write, but I didn't start my career as an author. I was in Intel in a very tech role, and I just submitted a blog post for Huffington Post. And at that time, Huffington Post was very difficult to get in. Once you got in, you were a regular contributor. My blog post was, I wrote about how I felt like ever since I came to the US, I did my PhD here, I started working, I always wanted to go back to India. But once I became pregnant with my daughter, unfortunately, 3 months before I was going to give birth to her is when the Delhi gang rape happened. And it affected me tremendously because I was in exactly that place just before coming back to the US while pregnant in my third trimester. And all the places where that happened is a posh part of Delhi. It is not, and I was so affected that I couldn't sleep at night. I was thinking this woman did everything that she was told to do right. She was not alone. She was with another person. She took public transportations. She was not out too late. And she died the most horrific death possible. And I was getting up. I had to go see a psychiatrist along with being pregnant because I couldn't sleep. So I wrote a post. And the post was that I really started revisiting whether or not I do want to go back to India now that I will have a girl child. And because I was genuinely worried about the day-to-day safety aspects and how much freedom and liberty she would have, the life I can live in the US versus what she can live there. The post was in no way to talk about US doesn't have gender rights problem. That is not the issue of the post yet. And also, I was very vocal about certain things I learned in the US, which made me very proud of my birth country at that time. What I managed to do is I managed to somehow anger both Indians and people in the West. And that was good for the post. It went viral. There were like, 7,000 shared. A lot of people wrote to me about relating. Yahoo News picked it up. I think my author career got started because of that. But I also got over 700 comments on my webpage on a few hours with death threats. The Western media is paying me, or like, George Soros is paying me or someone. And I was thinking, if that was really happening, it would be so wonderful. No one is paying me. No one is finding me out to talk about gender issues. But I really went into a panic attack stage because I never expected that. I didn't realize when I was saying things out loud in the public, when it comes to you as a tsunami, your calm ability to go respond to that in a way in which it would make sense goes away. Because at point you think at that time there were no robots or trolls, right? So these are all humans writing. But, just like when people started calling journalists prostitutes, and sometimes I go on Twitter and I see certain journalist feed is just filled with abuse. It was similar case, like people were calling me stupid cow, they were calling me I hope you die, and like, you're useless, and these were emails nonstop. But that taught me a very important life lesson. That taught me the importance of distancing yourself as a persona from what you are trying to talk to and what reaction that might provoke. And I think that has been a very good life lesson for me, because even now when I try to make posts and I do things, I expect that there is a huge amount of possibility that that would create some risk, a huge amount of negative reaction. I will have to separate myself from the reaction, whether that's positive or negative, versus the message that I'm trying to say. So that's what I would say to this point.
Nilanjana, would you like to add or build on this perspective?
Yeah, first of all, to answer your first question, I mean, literature or writing, of any form is, of course, a very powerful tool, and as authors, I think we have the ability to tell stories and to humanize, sensitive topics. So what happens is that generally, mm, there are narratives, right? And where authors come in it's just exactly in that middle point where they can actually humanize, whether it's non-fiction or fiction. We have the ability to, present a different perspective, or even, place different perspectives. And I think, that's a huge tremendous power. And as an author, I feel that, I feel the pressure of that power. And I think in my books, I always try to humanize, rather than, sort of, like lecture, if you know what I mean. To come to the second part of your question, I think, as a woman journalist and an author, um criticism is often, very out there, and sometimes it's very passive aggressive, right? So out there, when I say out there, it's obviously I'm talking about online. There's, it's no secret that women are, like victims of more online violence. And, like as a journalist, I've been called many names, and from prostitute to, horrible, like stuff in my inboxes. And but I remember, like Tanushree was saying, that one of my editors, had once told me, and this is the beginning of the social media boom. And I think I was working with Time magazine at that point of time, and somebody had posted something, and somebody had some story I had posted, and this was the beginning of the right-wing alliance in India, and somebody had come and said something, and I responded to it. So basically I was having an argument, with this troll. And I know my editor told me that, I understand where you're coming from, but at a certain level you have to keep a little bit of distance, like from what they're saying, because as a writer, you write. How people take it, some people will take it well, some people will not take it well. That is not up to you. You don't have to. And sort of in my life, I've always followed that. But I remember, writing this opinion piece for the Washington Post on some right-wing politics, and I was out of town when that post was published, and I was a morning I woke up and I opened my Twitter feed, and it was filled with like I still can feel that emotion, it was filled with such vicious threats. And I remember, I was just trembling, I was standing there, and this is like me, like after 15 years of, facing all kinds of passive aggressive threats as a woman journalist and a writer. And I was just shaking there. And I remember I called up a friend and I said, what should I do? And she, is quite a veteran, so to say, in this space. And she said, do nothing, just take a deep breath, this is going to stop. And it didn't stop for 2 days, and those 2 days were the most anxiety ridden, of my entire life. But after those 2 days pass, I realized again that, as a writer, you have to, especially if you have decided that you are not going to sit on the fence, that you are going to have a voice, and that you are going to use that voice, then you cannot be scared of criticism. I mean, there are different kinds of writers, there are different kinds of authors, but I feel that, authors are they give voice to their generations, in their ways, whatever they're writing on. And I feel that as an author, you have to carry on, no matter, you cannot be deterred by threats and I know, this is sometimes it is just impossible. And some of us are just, like, you cannot really do it. Every time it happens to you, you are still, shaken. But I feel that, if you have decided that, you are going to have a public stand on issues, that, it is important to take a public stand on issues, then, you have to, you also have to understand that the criticism will come as part of it. That cancel culture is somebody will, somebody will cancel you, you will be somebody's cancellation person and somebody's hero. So, it's just part and parcel of this whole thing that you have taken on yourself. And as I said again, that as writers, we give voice to not just the voiceless, and increasingly, all over the country, I think, there are more people who are voiceless than who are not. So I think, we are at a very hallowed position, where, we can actually give, give that voice, talk about things. And, we should. And that's how, that's how I've always felt. And I do understand that this is kind of a probably like a very privileged position, an ableist position also. But I think where we can, if we can, we should.
Yes, Ms. Muniba.
All right, thank you. I think those were very insightful answers. I'll add a few points to that. So to speak to the first question, in terms of the role that literature plays in, initiating conversations and transmitting information, I think it's already been shared by the other panelists that literature gives voice to others and, even to ourselves. And, just to illustrate this, I'll give an example. You could read a history book on colonialism and get the facts of it, but you only really get a sense of it when you read a book by a writer who's covering the colonial time, who's telling the stories of the people and whose lives were impacted at that time. So, for example, the book After Lives by the Nobel Prize-winning author Abdul Razak Gunra, that speaks to, colonial Africa, and it beautifully illustrates the impact that time had on the lives, on the day-to-day lives of the people living over there at that time, in a way that history books cannot, right? Similarly, you could read about domestic violence, and that's a fact, those are numbers. Then you could read about you could hear about domestic violence in Italy a few centuries back. That's still a fact. It's a fact that's a lot less important. But when you read a book, narrating the story of somebody who's actually been through that, those characters become real, and you start to empathize with them, and you start to see how, their lived experiences. And in that way, literature has a really important role to play. Similarly, resistance poetry, something that's been, a tool used by poets in the subcontinent for a very long period of time. Most subcontinental recent poetry is political, and it's beautiful that it is, because you can transmit so many ideas through metaphors, through words that people can relate to, and that often gives strength and hope to people as well. Now, coming to the second point of handling criticism, just speaking back into, we'll take a step back and look at the importance of literature in transmitting our voices. And then before we understand how to dissect criticism, right? Now, criticism could be of two kinds, and and I'll share a little bit of my personal experience over there as well. Criticism could be on the content, on the way it's narrated, on your style of writing, in which case I think it's well, not necessarily valid, but it's often something that an author should be looking for and taking into account. But equally, as somebody who's done an extensive novel writing course in the UK and spoken to agents and so on as well, though briefly, I have found that criticism is often sometimes criticism comes from a place of lack of understanding of the other person's perspective and a lack of willingness to let others tell their stories in a way that is authentic to them. So I'll give you an example. I was writing a story that was based in Karachi in the early 2000s, a time that I had spent in Karachi. And I was told by others who had never been to Karachi what words to use to describe Karachi. Right? You need to talk about a smoky, a dusty old city. Whereas the place in Karachi that I was describing was not like that at all. And the reason I share this is because it's a very important point for authors to remember that, if you are trying to stay authentic to your narrative, you need to know whether or not criticism is coming from a place of being well-informed and being well-intended, or isn't, before you dissect how to respond to it. And equally, when I run Ravani, I'm often told, there are people who appreciate the kind of content that we put out, but there are people who tell us to, speak or not speak to certain narratives. And to me, and for me, the response to that always is, we need to know who our audience is and also who our audience isn't, right? You're never going to be able to speak to the entire world if you're being authentic to yourself, and that's okay. And equally, you need to remember, is your job as a writer to please others, or is your job as a writer to stay authentic to your craft and to the message that you're trying to share?
Okay, if I may add. So I think that storytelling is something very human, and the humans have always been telling stories. And the origin of all the knowledge is when the people would sit together and tell stories. And literature has a very, I think, important role to play in not only human civilization, but it has a very cathartic value as well. So in many revolutionary and resistance literature, where you would see many people who would not have any space to voice their concerns, they would find their representation in these kinds of stories and writings where their experiences have been given words. So in that way, that is very important that authors are, as a creative process, authors are doing to represent the voiceless. And one thing more that when we are talking about canceling and culture and all that, I'm just thinking that perhaps platform like this, when we are talking about the challenges that people engaged in creative process face, is that like when there is a lot of criticism on people who are presenting a certain point of view, which is not very agreeable to the majority, then we need to build a community of each other who can support people, the authors engaged in this creative process, have the courage to speak for the voiceless. And perhaps this is our responsibility to establish that kind of camaraderie for other people who are taking that lead. So it's something that kind of an effort is going to, like in a way, create a group where one would not feel alone and attacked.
I can just add one just quick thing. What Selma said is very important. Nowadays, even it's not so much about if you're offending the community, right? Because a lot of the comments are from trolls. So especially on social media, when the criticism is coming, it's very hard to know if it's real criticism from many different person with the law of averages, or is it just being drowned under a popular opinion for whatever particular intention there is behind it. I think the only way is to support each other in this. And this might sound very utopic, but I have found that when someone is being attacked, even if one or two people just comes in and posts something, yes, they will get attacked too. But at least that boosts a little bit of moral confidence. Okay, this is not one person against the tide. Other people also think like this. So that's what I would say can help.
Okay, this is the last question that I'm going to ask you all, since we are speaking about social media. So, social media, how do social media platforms and digital communication channels influence this dynamics of public discourse? And since there are journalists, writers, content writers, um, how they are ensuring the integrity and reliability of the information that they are disseminating. One is that. Second thing is, when you're adopting a strategy while disseminating this information, because we always hear that you have to stay relevant with your content and everything. How do you think on these communication strategies that will help you remain relevant and also sensitive to the evolving landscape, especially in a digital age? What would be your strategy while putting out those sensitive information, especially to ensure that there is a balance in public discourse? Anybody can take it up.
I think, I'll go if it's okay. I think, as a journalist, I feel, facts, it's very important because misinformation is a curse, of the digital age. So, first of all, actually, let me just walk back a little bit. I think, first of all, is honesty. Like, I never ever force myself to post. I will only post, if I have something to add to the discourse. And you don't have to jump onto, like any trending topics. I feel, that's my absolutely personal feeling. I only add if I have to have something to add. So that honesty, it's like it's very important for me. Because I often, come across opinion on social media, which is very half-hearted, which is like, you read it and that the writer has no ownership over it. And secondly, as I said, fact, of course, like even for 240 characters Twitter post, I do a fact check. Like, I would not just retweet just because somebody has requested me to, or, like just because like a post is doing well. I always, fact check. And for me, I know, social media is a very fast moving, medium, but that really doesn't bother me because, if I put something out there, even for a second, which is, misinforming my followers, that's a failure on my part and a huge failure on my part. So I think, those two things are very important for me.
So I'll go next. I think you've, approached it in a beautiful way, in saying that you should only post, or, that your strategy is only to post when you have something of substance to say. I completely agree with that. And I would say this should be every authentic author's, or, anybody in any field, this should be the ideal approach, right? Because there is so much content out there. I feel like there's enough noise. There is still a value for, and there is still an audience for valuable content, even if it's not frequent, even if it's not following the, the logic of an algorithm, even if it's not, the sensible thing to do. I feel like there's still an audience for authentic, detailed content. And I know that Gen Z is a lot more on social media. I'm a millennial and I'm a little wary of it, which they tell authors it's not a wise thing to do nowadays. But I feel like the risk with social media is, well, the impact that it can have is that you can get messages out there a lot faster, right? It's allowed a lot more people who would otherwise be marginalized, in whatever career space they are, to actually have their voice and talent noticed. And I think that's really powerful. But equally, there's a lot of disinformation. The algorithm is not perfect. It's not fair to everyone. And, you need to be aware of, the pitfalls of social media as well. And so the approach to it, I would say, ties back into what we'd said for the last question. As an author, what are you trying to achieve? As an author, who is your audience? And as an author, why are you writing? Are you writing for the public? Are you writing for applause? And are you writing to be appreciated by everyone? Or are you writing for the sake of being authentic to yourself? And if you're doing that, then I would say the same side to you that comes out in your writing should be there on social media as well.
So I would say that writing and creative process is a very solitary, usually happens in a solitary space. And though you are, there's so many communities and people who don't have voice, and you're trying to become their voice. There's something that you are trying that moves you to write, but it's something that's very solitary. And when it's out, then naturally you are not only presenting your view of the world, but trying to connect with so many others as well. Whereas the social media, I think there's a lot of it is guided and run by a desire, a narcissistic desire. So this is how these two appear to very opposing to me. Whether it's content or visual content or written content, there's a narcissism that guides me to be there on the social media, and that's where the problem is, and that's where the message is confused. And but in terms, instead of connecting, it is like really creating divide. So what is needed is, I think we need to be educated. The user needs to be educated. Is that really be aware of it, the intention that is there to be on the social media, and then without the right intention, I think we are going to create confusion. And as said earlier, the reality is also being created. It's something which is not there, and something which is there, a reality, is now being confused. And you can see, look around the world, the wars happening, the people suffering, and people, it's not moving us. Why? Because of the kind of confusion that is being created through these mediums. So I think the motivation behind the creative process is different from the motivation that one uses to be on the social media, and that is making all the difference.
Tanu, would you like to build on this?
Yeah, I actually, so first, I would absolutely agree with Salma's point. I actually found a tremendous internal conflict trying to deal with this, being very internalized and solitary with my views, and therefore turning to writing, versus then having to actually be more an influencer and a marketeer. And the point is, if I had those interests or skills, I would not take to writing. I would probably then it would be something else. Now, so that's a very big conflict in the craft and how you want to use that craft versus what might need to be done given what is going on in terms of needing to stand out or your word, your work to get noticed. But I think that the first question you asked is, how is social media changing things? So it's first, I think Muniba probably said it, or maybe it was Nilanjana. It has democratized things a lot, not just social media, but all internet-enabled platforms like Amazon or YouTube. And it is very easy now to create a short film and get it out, or publish a book or self-publish a book, and all kind of stuff. But I read a very interesting, actually listened to a very interesting podcast, which was saying that the trends are reversing again a little bit. And after TikTok following that model, social media is slowly becoming less social and more media, almost like television. And it's like, the content that is going to be consumed. I think there might be a little bit of opportunity of success there again, in terms of if that really does happen, then all this noise around creating a narrative and then having it as a public debate forum might again be contained a little bit in terms of maybe content that is balanced. Now, that being said, I think in terms of your second question on what to do about this, I agree with Nilanjana. I also have two rules of posting. Initially, I felt every publisher I worked with told me, oh, you have to have this many followers on Twitter, this many followers on Instagram, you have to create your website, create a band name. Very quickly, I realized that's not me. That's going to completely stress me out. And that is the problem, is that is not even the readership or the audience I'm after. That is not, what will give any value to my work, because again, I talked about the audience before. If it lands with the wrong audience, it would do the opposite of what I'm trying to do with the work. So my rules are just like Nilanjana. If I feel I have something valuable to add to which hasn't been said, only then I try to post on it. Or my second rule is I post if I feel someone needs support. So sometimes I go in and I see that, okay, someone is being very viciously attacked for sharing a view that I also agree with her, or even if I don't completely agree with him or her, I do post for that reason. And I think that doing this too is probably what we can do at an individual level. And then Nilanjana also said the third very important thing, which is we should not become the part of changing opinions into facts bandwagon, right? So if we do that, then we create a huge problem. I have coached my sister a lot on this. Many times she gets a WhatsApp and she immediately posts it on Facebook saying, oh my God, look at what is happening in this world. And even with my family, I have to slowly coach them. Look, please fact check. And they have a valid problem. They say, how do I fact check? If I Google, first few things say, yeah, this is true. And that is the problem that is happening today. Really fact checking something is becoming really difficult for people who are not savvy beyond a certain level with the internet. So that's probably one thing that would really need to be very important for journalists. And by journalists, I mean people who are in the field. I read a very sad article on New York Post on something about journalism becoming less and less valuable just because of how facts are being manipulated. So I think that's where maybe something needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. So at the end of the day, the question is who is consuming who in terms of social media. Is social media consuming us, or are we consuming social media? On that note, we'd like to end this session, and I'm handing over the next schedule with Namrata.
Thank you, everyone. This was a very enlightening conversation, very interesting insights, and everything that I agree to, and a very important conversation also. At the end of this video, I will include details about all of your social media handles, your books for the viewers. I'm sure the viewers will have a lot to take away from this session. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sridevi.
Thank you, Namrata. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having.